Hello everyone, welcome back. Today's in this video, we will discuss Kuki and Manipuri Naga people's shared concerns. Let's begin. The Kuki and Manipuri Naga people, although distinct in their ethnic identities and traditions, share common experiences and concerns, especially when it comes to issues of border security, ethnic identity, and political movements in the region. These communities, who reside in the northeastern part of India, have lived through a history of complex relationships with the Indian state, neighboring communities, and international boundaries. While the dynamics between them are intricate, they find common ground on key issues that shape their lives and livelihoods. Two of the most significant points of unity between the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people are their shared opposition to the removal of the Free Movement Regime, FMR, and border fencing along the Indo-Myanmar border, as well as their mutual resistance to the Meitei majority movement that has impacted the tribal communities, especially the Kuki. 1. Dislike of the removal of the Free Movement Regime, FMR, and border fencing on the Indo-Myanmar border. One of the most important issues that has united both the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people is their opposition to the removal of the Free Movement Regime, FMR, and the construction of border fencing along the Indo-Myanmar border. The FMR, a system that allows people from both sides of the Indo-Myanmar border to move freely within a designated area, has been a long-standing arrangement that benefits the indigenous populations living along the border. The removal of this regime, along with the construction of border fencing, poses significant challenges for these communities, especially the Kukis and Nagas, who have familial, cultural, and economic ties across the border. The Kuki and Manipuri Naga people, particularly those living in the border areas of India and Myanmar, have historically maintained close cross-border relationships. Families and communities are often divided by the political border, but remain united through cultural practices, trade, and shared history. These border communities rely on the FMR to maintain their traditional way of life, especially for trade and personal interactions. The FMR allows people to move freely between the two countries, engaging in trade, attending family events, and participating in cultural exchanges without the constraints of formal visas and immigration processes. For the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people, the removal of the FMR disrupts these long-standing ties. With the construction of border fencing, these border communities face the threat of being cut off from their relatives, livelihoods, and cultural connections on the other side of the border. The Kuki and Naga populations who live in Myanmar, many of whom trace their ancestry to areas across the border, will find it difficult to maintain their identities and way of life in a region increasingly being sealed off from India. Moreover, the removal of the FMR could lead to increased militarization along the border, making life more difficult for the people living there. These communities fear that this militarization could lead to further violence and instability, particularly in a region that has already experienced conflicts related to insurgency, ethnic identity, and border disputes. The Kuki and Manipuri Naga people also oppose border fencing because it creates physical and psychological barriers between them and their relatives across the border. The fencing impedes their movement and complicates the relationship between the two countries. Instead of fostering goodwill and cooperation, it has the potential to foster resentment and mistrust between the indigenous people of both sides of the border. The border regions have long been sites of cooperation and mutual aid between the people of India and Myanmar, but the removal of the FMR and the construction of border fencing threaten to undermine this cooperative relationship. The Kuki and Manipuri Naga people fear that their traditional routes of communication, trade, and cultural exchange will be severed, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. This shared opposition to border control measures highlights the importance of cross-border connections for these communities and their desire to preserve their way of life. Second, opposition to the Meitei majority movement against tribals. Another significant issue that unites the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people is their opposition to the growing influence of the Meitei majority in Manipur and the political movement led by the Meitei community that aims to consolidate political power in the state. The Meitei majority movement, which advocates for the protection of Meitei interests, has had a profound impact on the tribal communities in Manipur, especially the Kuki. The Kuki people, who live in the hilly areas of Manipur, are surrounded by the Meitei majority population in the valley, as well as the Manipuri Naga people in the neighboring regions. This makes the Kuki people unique in their position, as they act as a geographical and social boundary between the Meitei and Manipuri Naga communities. The Kuki people have faced significant pressure from both sides, especially with regard to issues of land rights, autonomy, and political representation. As a result, they have had to navigate the tensions between the Meitei majority movement and the Manipuri Naga aspirations for greater autonomy. The Meitei majority movement, which has been fueled by demands for greater political power and rights for the Meitei people, has led to an erosion of the tribal status of the Kuki and Naga communities. The Meitei majority in Manipur has often sought to impose policies and legislation that marginalize the tribals. These measures include attempts to curtail the autonomy of tribal areas, prevent the expansion of tribal land holdings, and promote policies that favor the Meitei population in terms of political and economic resources. One of the primary grievances of the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people is the fear that the Meitei majority movement will lead to a further erosion of their rights and privileges as indigenous communities. The Kuki and Naga tribes have historically enjoyed certain protections under the Indian Constitution, including provisions for land rights, political representation, and affirmative action. However, the Meitei majority movement has sought to challenge these protections, leading to concerns that the Kuki and Naga communities will be relegated to a secondary status within the state. For the Kuki people, this issue is particularly pressing, as they find themselves caught between two powerful forces, the Meitei majority movement and the Manipuri Naga aspirations for greater autonomy. The Kuki have always maintained a precarious position between the Meitei and Naga communities, and their involvement in the political dynamics of the state has often been marginalized. In this context, the Kuki people fear that the Meitei majority movement will undermine their political influence, push them further into the margins of society, and restrict their access to resources and opportunities. The Kuki and Manipuri Naga people are also concerned about the Meitei's growing influence in state politics. In recent years, the Meitei majority movement has gained significant traction, and there are concerns that the movement's success could lead to a further consolidation of power in the valley, sidelining the interests of the tribals in the hills. Both the Kuki and Naga communities are wary of this trend, as they believe it could lead to the domination of the Meitei people over the entire state, leaving the tribals without a political voice. In addition to these political and cultural concerns, the Meitei majority movement has also created social and economic tensions between the Kuki and Meitei communities. The Kuki, who are often seen as a buffer between the Meitei and Naga populations, find themselves in the middle of a complex web of rivalries and conflicts. As a result, they are often caught in violent clashes and political struggles that threaten their stability and way of life. The Kuki people are particularly vulnerable in this situation because they are geographically located between the Meitei and Manipuri Naga communities, and their position often places them at the center of political and social tensions. The Kuki have been forced to navigate these rivalries carefully, trying to maintain a balance between the demands of the Meitei and the Naga communities while protecting their own interests and autonomy. Conclusion: the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people, despite their distinct ethnic identities and histories, share common concerns and struggles. Their opposition to the removal of the Free Movement Regime, FMR, and border fencing along the Indo-Myanmar border, as well as their shared resistance to the Meitei majority movement, highlights the deep-seated issues that affect both communities. The Kuki, who live between the Meitei and Manipuri Naga populations, find themselves at the crossroads of these two forces, and their position is increasingly precarious. For the Kuki and Manipuri Naga people, the preservation of their cultural, social, and political identities is of paramount importance. They face challenges on multiple fronts, from the erosion of their cross-border connections to the threats posed by the growing political dominance of the Meitei community in Manipur. As they navigate these challenges, the Kuki and Naga people continue to struggle for their rights, autonomy, and recognition within the broader political landscape of Manipur and India. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel, Zalengam Media.